How do we build realistic and robust visions of the future of the global energy system? It's a great time to be having this conversation because it feels like there are a couple of disruptive forces pushing on the energy system, pushing on our geopolitics, and trying to figure out what we can make of these and how we need to adjust our visions of the future to accommodate them is a really important task, and some of the think tanks should take the lead on. So
we have some old elements and some new elements. The old elements, of course, is that energy is life. When you look at our world today, it's a world that was built on fossil energy from the Industrial Revolution onwards. So for the last 150 years, we've burned fossil energy, and that has given us all that we have today. So that constant is still present. What has changed, of course, is the imperative to keep emissions below a certain level if you want to keep global warming in check. And the tension between what is required, which is more energy, and what is also required, which is less emission, is very prevalent, and that's the tension that defines ourselves. And just as an introduction, this actually is the motto of our company, TotalEnergies. Our motto is more energy, less emissions. A couple of issues that stand out from the work we do. The first one, which we don't necessarily see living in Paris, or I'm assuming living in Washington, D.C., is that there are about 4.5 billion people on this planet that don't have enough energy. It means it's not like they don't have energy at all. They do have some energy, but they don't have enough. And if they had a bit more, life expectancy would be longer, child mortality would be lower, illiteracy rate would be higher. It's 4.5 billion people today, more than half of the world, that need more energy to live better, fulfilling life. And we don't see that here, right? Because all of us have enormous amount of energy at our disposal. But the first thing to realize is that for half of the world, that is not the case. So more energy is really essential. The second thing is, when you look at history, the way we solve our energy problem was essentially burning coal. When you look at the numbers, the Industrial Revolution, we start burning coal. You look at China in 2000, they start burning coal. And in fact, when you do the math, there's sort of a coincidence that every dollar of GDP that China built over the last 20 years cost us 556 grams of CO2. Every dollar of GDP. When we do the same thing for Europe, from 1850 and the United States, Europe and the United States, from 1850 to 2020, you get the same exact number. Every dollar of GDP, 556 grams of CO2. So what China has done over the last 20 years, which is immensely polluting, is lifting 800 million people out of poverty, and the cost of that is 556 grams of CO2 per dollar of GDP, exactly as we did with the Industrial Revolution. Now, one of the key questions facing us is, what about the next 4 billion people? When are they going to come out of poverty? Are they going to burn coal like we did? And 556 grams of CO2 times 4 billion people getting out of poverty, you can imagine that that's a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere. Or are they going to find a new way to develop, a low carbon way to develop, using the new technologies that we have developed, solar panels, batteries, wind turbines, and so on and so forth?
From your perspective, what are the key critical levers we should be thinking about, whether that's technology innovation, finance, institutional reforms in emerging markets? I mean, not just on the margins, how do we fundamentally approach this issue of 4.5 billion people meeting their development needs?
I can tell you what it is not about, and then we can discuss what it is about. It's not about technology. We have the technology. I mean, solar panels now are dirt cheap. The cost of producing electricity with solar panel is lower than with most technologies. So you're going to tell me, well, but we produce only when the sun shines, and what about nights, and so on and so forth. But by and large, the technology is available today to provide clean electricity. And that's important. It's not just because we have energy, we can build coal-fired plants, but we have the technology to provide clean electricity. So it's not about technology. It's not really about money. This is not the numbers we're talking about. So the real challenge is the political and the governance. It's just the nexus of how does this country develop their own institutions.
Right.
That institutions are essential to economic development. The Nobel Prize was awarded to two economists, one from Harvard, one from MIT, who showed us the importance of institutions. So it's how do they build their institutions, and how do we, as rich countries, want to contribute to their development? And this is all about the geopolitics and the strategies aspect of it.
From the finance side, which I completely agree, there's plenty of private capital around the world to accomplish this goal. You hear, we don't have projects, right? Bankable projects are just not available at the standards necessary for international capital. And then you go over and you speak to people like frustrated, happy warriors in the developing world, and they say, well, we can't get finance, right? Well, there's plenty of opportunity here. How do we solve, I mean, it's not quite a chicken and an egg issue, but how do we solve that apparent mismatch?
The challenge, of course, is that the countries that really need that energies are countries that have institutions that are fragile and that are in the process of being built. So there's no easy answer to the question you're asking, which is the core of the issue, but those are the solutions. Now, there is something else that's being developed, which is called blended finance, which is some risk sharing between private capital and government. Yeah. But again, that requires cooperation, multilateral cooperations,
right.
And governments saying, we're going to set up a guarantee mechanism. We're not going to finance all the project. It's going to be private capital, but we're going to take a share of the risk.
Right.
And if you take 10% of the risk, you can reduce the cost of capital and make the project bankable. Those are the issues that people are struggling with, but you're absolutely right that there's a yawning gap between the need and the opportunity and what is actually being done. Providing energy to the developing world is really in the best interest of developed economies. Yeah. There's tremendous work that was done at the IMF actually a couple of years ago on what they call the great carbon arbitrage. And I show that it is in the selfish interest of the United States to reduce the emissions of the developing world, because the cost of emissions abatement is significantly lower than the cost of not doing it, right? Global warming, loss of GDP, US GDP is massive, so even if you lose only 1% of GDP, it's an enormous amount of money, much more than it would cost to actually decarbonize some of the regions.
It's clear that global gas demand is growing, and LNG demand in particular is growing fast. What's your view, and what role does that resource play in the coming years as an energy security tool, as an economic development tool, as a sort of energy systems planning hedge, as we're trying to accomplish all of these goals?
Gas as the is really the energy that enables us to transition away from coal. So when you look at coal today, burning coal to produce electricity, it's 10 billion tons of CO2 per year. It's massive. It's the single biggest source of emission. So if you replace that coal by renewables and gas, you eliminate 8 billion tons of CO2.
This year in Cape Town from September 29th right on to the 3rd and the 4th of October, we are going to really deal with signing new energy contracts that will come into developing our upstream energy sector. I'm excited when I look at what we'll have around the Just Transition concert. It's going to be amazing. Nobody can doubt us when it comes to putting together a great show. Our finance forum this year stands to bring in no less than $20 billion in deals that's going to be signed. It's really important to be part of that. Take a look at our agenda, be part of it, don't hesitate to reach out, and let's go make Africa proud. Let's continue to produce energy for human flourishing. It's time to unleash our true potential.
So this new report, the Global Energy Review, provides the first full picture of supply and demand data for 2024, covering the entire energy sector, all fuels, technologies, regions, and emissions.
Now, I would like to share a couple of key points when I look at the report, some takeaways, which I thought might be important to underline. The very first one is, dear colleagues, when we look at the numbers, we see global energy demand surges, very strong growth in 2024. It is about 2 times faster than the historical averages. In the last 10 years, global energy demand on average increased about 1%. And now, 2024, it increased more than 2 percentage points. Why it is happening? It is happening mainly driven by the economic growth, economic development coming from the emerging and developing countries, which is a usual, well-established trend. But also, we see, after years and years of decline of energy demand in advanced economies, we see a return to growth, which we have not seen since many years. If we put the COVID years aside for a moment, for example, for the European Union, we see energy demand increase for the first time since the year 2017. And it is, of course, for North America and other parts of the advanced economies. And if you look at a bit further, the numbers, why global energy demand growth is so strong, we see one very clear trend: electricity growth. Global electricity demand increased 2 times higher than the global energy demand. Now, in our World Energy Outlook, we published last November, we said that even though oil and gas will remain as essential energy carriers, we see the footsteps, we hear the footsteps of the age of electricity coming. And this is yet another example that the energy demand is growing, but the electricity demand increases 2 times higher than the energy demand growth. Driven by industrial growth, by air conditioning, the loss of air conditioning, the AI, data centers, and also with the electric cars penetration coming through. So this is pinning the electricity demand growth so strongly around the world. And we also see in our global energy review of the IEA that the big chunk of this electricity demand growth is met by renewables, solar and wind, but also nuclear power. And the rest comes from natural gas and coal. So perhaps one word on renewables, very impressive. Last year, our numbers show about 700 gigawatts of renewable capacity is added to the global electricity fleet. And my colleagues told me that it is the 22 2 years in a row that renewables are breaking records in terms of their capacity additions. We also see that the nuclear is coming strongly. And again, in our nuclear report this January, we claim, and this report, our Global Energy Review report, once again underlines the very fact that we expect 2025, this year, we will see the highest nuclear electricity generation in the history, the peak of nuclear electricity generation. There is one other factor which pushes the energy demand growth, especially electricity demand growth, which is the rising temperatures. The heat waves around the world in turn pushes the electricity demand growth, which in turn gives a push to, in some countries like China and India, coal consumption growth. Another point I would like to make is on oil. Electricity is important, but oil is still the most important strategic commodity as far as the energy markets are concerned. Of course, oil is and will stay in the many years to come as a strategic commodity for the energy markets. But as a result of the slowdown of oil demand growth, we see for the first time the share of oil in the global energy mix went below 30%. This is mainly, dear colleagues, driven by China. Because in the last 10 years, China alone was responsible more than 60% of global oil demand growth. And Chinese economy is slowing down and changing its nature, becoming lighter, plus the penetration of electric cars meant Chinese oil demand growth is very slow. We have seen that the natural gas demand is also very strong, and our numbers in the Global Energy Review says that the global gas demand increased last year about 115 BCM. Compared to historical averages, it is significantly higher, and it is mainly driven by providing input to electricity generation. Global emissions last year increased less than 1%, but still did increase. If we want to find a silver lining, we see that there is a continuous decoupling of economic growth from emissions growth. So it is this decoupling is now cemented last year, even though global economy increased in a healthy way, global emissions growth was less than 1%, less than what we have seen before. And this is mainly as a result of the increasing share of renewables, stronger nuclear penetration, and the increasing number of electric cars and other technologies.
So let us start with where Dr. Birol started. How much did global energy demand rise globally last year? And it was indeed a very healthy growth, 2.2%. Is this a lot? Is it little? So if you compare it with the average over the past decade, is a very healthy growth. Over the past decade, we had an average growth of around 1.3%, and now in 2024, 2.2%. So let's try to understand the components and the reasons of this growth. So if we compare with GDP, energy demand grew a bit less than GDP. although, as Dr. Birol mentioned, a healthier economic growth last year, a bit above what we had over the past decade, definitely contributed to the healthy increase in energy demand. But if you want to find one reason, here you have it, is really electricity. Electricity grew very strongly, grew well above GDP, and there are very clear reasons why that happened. First is our economies are increasingly becoming dependent to electricity through digitalization. First and foremost, we have had very robust growth in investments in data centers, for example. The second reason is that electricity using equipment, from electric vehicles to heat pumps to all of sorts of things that we are using to electrify our economies, are growing in a very, very healthy manner, and it was the case in 2024 too. And third, as Dr. Birol mentioned, 2024 broke a lot of records in terms of weather, certainly in terms of record temperatures, extremes, and those really also helped through cooling needs to push up electricity demand. So if you understand how this worked, actually a very simple number, a very clear number, electricity demand and what we needed to produce this electricity demand actually accounted for 70% of the increase in total energy demand. So what did we use to fuel all this additional demand? You can see here, actually all of the fuels grew. Very clearly renewables led the way in meeting this additional demand growth, followed by natural gas and coal, oil, and nuclear. So we see all of the fuels contributing to this demand growth. Which countries contributed to the growth? Here you see it very clearly. Emerging market and developing economies accounted for 80% of the growth in demand. You have countries going very fast. This is the case for India, Southeast Asia in general. So the fastest growth, it really moved to Asia. China slowed down very significantly, but China energy use is huge. It's more than a quarter of global energy demand. So even small percentage changes, less than 3%, make a huge difference in terms of volumes. So China slowed down. Just as a small reminder, at the beginning of the year 2000s, China was growing at around 8% a year, the following decade around 4% a year, and last year was less than 3%. Now, what happened to technologies and clean energy technologies globally? This is a very simple chart to explain. Everything went up very strongly. The electricity generation from solar and wind renewables combined was 900 terawatt hours. Now, 900 terawatt hours, how much is that? Is the addition in 1 year would have been able to power the entire economy of Japan. And if you look at other sources, we need to accumulate 10 years of growth in coal or 8 years for gas to have a similar amount. So a very, very significant growth. And when you put it together with the record increase of 33% in nuclear, all those sources combined accounted for 80% of the electricity, the record electricity demand additions. We see emissions slowing down very significantly in China. China grew, we said, around 3%, but the energy growth was 3%, and emission grew only 0.4%. This goes back again to something Dr. Birol mentioned. The Chinese economy is transforming, and over half of the growth in Chinese energy was actually clean energy. And finally, we're seeing other emerging countries and developing economies continuing to see emission growth, but at a slower rate than GDP. Now, at the root cause of this decoupling, there is one simple thing, and is the deployment of clean energy technologies. It's solar, wind, electric vehicles, heat pumps, and so on. So if you look at the amount of emissions we put in the atmosphere, the increment from 2024 to 2023 was around 300 million tons. And if you ask how much it would have been if we did not have all this clean energy technology in the system, it would have been 2.6 gigatons more.
Energy Week 2024.
I want to welcome everybody to this city, Cape Town, to Africa. Many call it Africa. We call it home. Welcome home.